Yeah, again, we're operating on the dataset's name rather than a cached ZFS handle. And then we're sending down the list of properties that we're requesting, and we're getting back the result. The results would be in an NV list in a defined format. So for example, it might have something like it maps from the property name to a string like source, tells you the name of the file system that set that property. So this is how you can find out about property inheritance. So if a property is set say at the pool level, then it would tell you that the source is the pool is set at that level, and then the property value is being inherited from there. And then the value, and then we might also return with this the received value. So this is a new thing that was added maybe 2 or 3 years ago, that we actually store, when you do a ZFS receive, we store both the locally set value and the value which was received from the ZFS receive, so that you can choose to override that received value and have your override value stick across multiple ZFS receives. As I mentioned, we want to leave this pretty printing to the user interface, and LibZFS 2 is not the user interface; it's the API. So, like the creation times, rather than returning strings like this, it would return, a time t. Rather than, byte counts like 1.23 G, it would just give you the number of bytes. Questions?
This would be a little bit like the KStat interface, if I remember correctly.
I'm not super familiar with the KStats. Do you want to?
KStat caches heavily the user line, so this is actually it's dissimilar in that regard, right? You're caching your KStat chain, and then you're being told. I mean, I think this is it's actually an improvement over that in that regard.
I don't see this as really that much common.
Yeah, but at least in the KStat case you get consistency between
yes.
different properties.
Right. So you could see this as like when you get these properties, that's like you're getting all those properties consistently, as opposed to making many calls to get them. Is there another question?
I'm concerned about the interface will never change. I have done programming in Windows World and gone through DLL help, where different libraries they change, and do you plan to support versioning of the libraries as progress and change your mind on?
So I think that what we'd like to do is sort out pretty well what we want this to look like. So I think probably what we'll see is that in the first few releases of this code into illumos, we probably won't actually say that the interfaces are committed and unchangeable, so that we can give everyone a chance to start using them, start integrating them with their products, and get feedback and make sure that that it works for them. But I think that once we get in, maybe 6 months after that or something, I think that we would want to make this stable interfaces committed, like we've done with many other interfaces in Solaris.
So actually, I think that there's a topic that's just been touched on, which is interface stability, and it probably deserves another conversation or another day. Certainly, when you had an entity like Oracle, right? You have one company and they're making guarantees, and this means something, right? For illumos, it's not clear to me that what interface stability means. And remember also that there's different commercial and non-commercial distributions of illumos. So what does interface stability mean in the context of illumos? We don't have a PSARC, right?
Yeah,
so
that's definitely a fair question.
I think that's a whole other meta conversation that maybe the community ought to have, but
in my mind, as I've been discussing it, I see these kind of commitments to interface stability as consensus, right? Like if you guys don't think that we should be doing this and we shouldn't have a committed stable interface, then like let's not do that. If we all agree that we should do that, then let's try to make that our goal, right?
I think to some extent, a lot of us come from this, the Sun background, and we still think along the PSARC lines. I about what commitment, stability, even in the terminology, unstable, what does that mean, right? If you don't come from a PSARC background, that you might think, oh my gosh, is it going to crash? No, let's just don't use it. Or it might change, rather. Probably we ought to start, one way to think about this is what we publicly document. And I think as Matt is saying, he's got some ideas on how we document this and how we release essentially knowledge of this to the community. Of course, it's all open source, so what does documentation really mean?
Definitely, I think we can borrow from Java. They have some interface stability, right? Not really.
We have historic interface stability. I think that we can have a meta conversation about interface stability. I think that I don't think we're going to rip out LibZFS anytime soon. I mean, one thing I would say, I know no one wants to have a nomenclature discussion, but the reality is that there's a nomenclature issue here that I do think you need to resolve, because you've got a set of principles that are guiding this, which are great. Those principles need to be reflected in the name, I think, and whether that's LibZFS base or core or whatever you want to thin or whatever you want to call it, I think you need to reflect the fact that it's not simply n+1, that you are actually doing something that is a different way of interfacing with the system. Because these things are realistically going to coexist in perpetuity. So we don't want to have, we don't want to have to explain why, you have to use one sometimes and two other times, right, to future generations. We want to have so the thing I would encourage, I think this is great, by the way. I think this is terrific, and I love the fact that you're pushing work down into the kernel to get atomicity, which I think we sometimes there are some that don't like to solve ugly problems because they're ugly, and so they kick them up to userland, and God knows we were tempted to do this on dtrace and did it a couple of times with dtrace. And the problem is that someone's got to go solve those problems, and someone's got to take out the trash, and what you're doing is putting the trash further down and making it cleaner for userland, which I think is huge. I think that's a huge win.
And I think that's a thing that we've seen actually kind of across many different things in our use of ZFS at Delphix, where problems were kind of kicked up to userland, and then we realized actually userland can't solve them. They can't solve it well, and Chris is going to talk about that a bit with the ZFS async destroy stuff later. And I think what you're saying also kind of ties in with this last almost cutoff point, which is there's a lot of kind of pseudo duplicated code, because LibZFS is doing a lot of error checking, so they can print all those nice messages to standard error. But then, of course, whenever it does its IACTals to the kernel has to do the same error checking, right? The kernel can't assume that you did the error checking correctly. So the kernel's already doing all those error checks, but then the checks are largely ignored or not useful enough in userland, partly because all that they are is an error number, right? So we like to change this so that the kernel's error checks can be preserved and returned all the way up to userland in cases where there's multiple error numbers or additional information like which of these many things that you asked me to do actually failed. We can use envy lists to pass that back up.
I just want to volunteer that we're actually currently struggling with some challenges with enumerating very long lists of ZFS where we have snapshots and things like that.
A lot of snapshots in your...
And it would be useful to have something that is restartable at an arbitrary point, for example, so a user interface element could say, well, give me the first 100, I don't really give a damn about the rest of them right now. I'll come back and get the rest, but then you need some sort of a stable enumeration key to do that that's independent of renames and things like that. So we should definitely talk about that. We actually have somebody prototyping something there. And
so the current interface, the libZFS interface doesn't expose this, but the IACTals down to the kernel does have a number that keeps track of where it is, and you could use that today to restart it. So, but that's something that we should definitely keep in mind with as we make changes to that.
So Matt, further discussion to happen with the ZFS working group, or what's the kind of venue for further discussion on this?
We can do it on the illumos.
Illumos discuss.
Let's do it on the illumos ZFS discuss list.
Great.
We just had about 3 posts.
Yeah, somebody mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure that I'm subscribed there. And then I looked like, oh, actually, I did subscribe to that. It's just I've only ever gotten 2 emails from it.
Well, we haven't really made the effort yet to push traffic over or to invite people from the old Open Solaris CFS, so that's something we can do.
Yeah.
I think the announcement to ZFS discuss that OS.0 needs to happen first.
Yeah,
So these guys will coordinate that effort.
yep.
Cool.
So that's all that I had. Any more questions, comments, concerns?
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Cool.
Hey.
So you can email me, matt@delphix.com, and I'll send out I'll send these slides and invitation for more comments on the mailing list.
Hey, Matt, I do have one question. How much help do you want or use?
I could definitely use help kind of determining the direction here. And I think once we get kind of once we kind of know where we're going, then I can definitely use help, converting, adding, once we kind of have the model set, then changing stuff over to LibZFS 2 would be really helpful, so.
/ LibZFS stable.
Yes,
or base.
LibZFS, sorry.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep.
I think we should use DLSim, by the way, creatively to solve this problem. Am I the only one to see that?
I mean, it's what the linkers do that.
Let's let the linker solve it.
You want to compile the kernel code into user mode.
Oh, no, you know what? That's a
and
better idea.
open the
Shock's-
same devices.
Shock's got a better idea.
Much better. Much better.
Thanks, Matt.